Before we start, remember kids, stranger danger. If you don't know 'em, don't give 'em the time of day. This was about 15 years ago or so. My parents had gone out for a nice dinner for their anniversary and decided that I was old enough and responsible enough to be left alone, at least just for a few hours on a weeknight. I was almost 9 at the time, and we owned a fairly protective dog as well, so what could possibly go wrong? They leave and tell me to lock up and call if anything happens. I do so and immediately proceed to party around the house like a rock star, because dude, I had the whole dang house to myself, and I could do whatever I wanted. Hell to the yeah. About halfway through a Sailor Moon marathon, I suddenly get a knock at the door. I was confused as all get out, because it had only been about 2 hours, and they had said they wouldn't be back until around 10 anyway. I guessed Mama had left something she needed behind again and swung around to grab it. My front door is a system of 2 doors, a super old, thick wooden one, from the house being originally built in the 30s, and then outside of that a screen door. My dog was raising absolute hell at the front door. I pulled her back a bit to try and calm her down because she had a tendency to be very reactive to almost any noise. Well, it was not my mom at the door. It was some middle-aged man I'd never seen before in my life. Puppo was now basically feral, so I kept the screen door firmly closed and a hand on her collar. I asked the man what he wanted. He started on in this weird convoluted story about how he had 2 young twin daughters and they'd gotten into a fight and one of them had run away. This man claimed that he believed his daughter was now hiding in my house and would like to come inside to look for her. I tell him immediately there is no such girl here. Why would he even think she would be here in the first place? He starts going in on this story about how this was the house they first lived in and how it's the one she was born in. It was like a safe place for her or something, and would likely be the most likely place she would run away to, as it was really the only other place she knows. I had felt kinda weird at first when I opened the door slightly and heard this dude's story, and this stuff was absolutely not helping his cause, but now I definitely knew something shitty was about to go down. I, in no uncertain terms, informed the guy he must have the wrong house, because this house was built and has been lived in by my family since its very initial construction. My dad was born in this house, and after my mom and dad told his parents that they were pregnant with my older sister, they gave it to them as a present to begin their new family. He must be mistaken, because I knew all of this to be fact. Hell, there were pictures less than 10 feet away from me on the wall of my dad and uncle playing in the front yard in the late 70s. By now, my dog was growling like crazy, and the dude was getting extremely agitated. He insists that I have no idea what I'm talking about. If I would just give him a few minutes to search for his daughter, he could be on his way right away. The latch on the screen door was broken at the time, and I was putting all my strength into holding my dog from the door. He opened the screen door with one hand, and the other reached for my closest arm. All of a sudden, that crazy cocker goes fucking ballistic. She used all her strength to lunge at him, grabbed a hold of his hand, and bit down fiercely. Now the man was yelling and confused. He pushed back against the screen door and slammed it shut to get my dog off of him. Sadie got pushed back inside, but she was still raging away. I quickly slammed the front door and locked it, and chained it tight. I ran around the house and made sure all the other doors and windows were locked, and then hunkered down in the bathroom, hyperventilating. I waited about 15 minutes until Sadie's growling had calmed some. I check outside, no man or his car. Both were now long gone. I call my parents and tell them they need to come home right now, please. When they get home, I recount the whole story. My dad goes to check the front door, and sure enough, on the screen door jamb and siding of the house was a large handprint of blood. Sadie was treated like a queen and got a whole steak for her to eat that weekend. When I was 15, I was in a really bad mental headspace. With that being said, I was depressed, lonely, and desperate for anyone's attention. So, against my better judgment, I made an account on Plenty of Fish. I understand that I put myself in a dangerous position for predators, but I also understand that any man who I told my age to should have just reported my account and not spoken to me. But after swiping left and right for about an hour, I met a man who I'll call Red. Red was 26, a father of 2 beautiful toddlers, and a Puerto Rican native who had recently moved to Florida. He spoke a fair bit of English and had this charm to him whenever he spoke. When I told him my age, it's scary now to think about just how okay he was with it. He simply told me that we wouldn't have sexual relations, and our other interactions would be innocent. We talked for a few months before talking eventually about meeting up. When I talked to Red, I felt very happy, whole, like I finally had someone to support me. The first few times we met up, it was fine. We went to the outlets, Disney Springs, the movies. He was a perfect gentleman, held my hand, opened doors for me, and most importantly, kept his hands off me. Eventually, we did kiss a bit, but nothing too intense. About 6 months into our relationship, though, I turned 16, and I invited him to my house, through means of sneaking in through my window, of course, and he agreed. We were just hanging out watching a movie, when he kissed me in a way he never had before, in a way I'd never been kissed before. It was surprising, and without having to be said, very overwhelming. I suddenly got very scared. It finally hit me in that moment that this guy was a full-grown man and I was just a child. I got off my bed and told him he had to leave. His face immediately contorted into anger, and he stepped toward me, trying to convince me through gritted teeth not to force him to go. He reached out to grab my shoulders, and out of instinct I shoved his chest to make him back off, only for a very harsh shove to be returned. A sudden hot pain overwhelmed me, spreading from the back of my head and down the rest of my body. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was hearing a blood-curdling scream. Hazed out and too weak to open my eyes fully, I could just barely make out my mom. I felt this wetness on my head, and my body felt so cold. It was just as I began to gather that something was very wrong, that I lost consciousness once again. The following time that I awoke was in a hospital bed. My head was pounding like crazy and aching in the back. I reached up to hazily feel where the pain was coming from, and my fingertips grazed a row of staples on a now bald patch on the left back of my head, making me wince. Things went by very fast from that point on. A doctor and my mother and father explained that I must have slipped and hit my head on the windowsill, being that that's where the first impact was made, before falling the rest of the way onto my tile floor. My mom had come into my room in the morning to wake me up for school and found me lying in a pool of my own blood. She thought I was dead because my breathing was so faint. But they had no idea as to why I had really slipped. I was too embarrassed and ashamed of myself to tell anyone. I didn't think I deserved justice for what Red did to me. Later on, I found out further obstacles would come from my injury, hearing loss in my right ear, as well as the inability to retain some old memories. This event and a few flash memories from my childhood are the last things that I remember from before the incident. Though I was saddened by this, I was happy to still be alive and never have to see Red again. Now being 18, a few months ago I signed up for Plenty of Fish again. I kept my wariness about me this time though, and didn't go on any dates. I looked out for warning signs this time, and upon the first one blocked just about everyone that messaged me. Then one day I received a new message. It was from Red. I had blocked him on every other platform, including his number. It just said, "Hey, how have you been?" I didn't respond, but I looked at his profile. It still said he was 26. How odd. Perhaps I never really knew his real age. Perhaps I didn't know this man at all, being that he thought he had killed me and selfishly ran off without even attempting to see if I was alive or even if he could help me. Update. I've seen all the comments of people suggesting and demanding that I go to the police. I've already taken action on this a few months ago. I didn't include it in the original story because I didn't want to feel like a fool. I went to the police by myself after seeing him on Plenty of Fish again, and they had no records for anyone with his name or age. I gave a description, but it was just like the description of any generic Hispanic male, and they couldn't really take action on it. I had no pictures with him, and his Plenty of Fish pictures all had his face covered somehow. The first time I ever really saw his face was when we started Snapchatting. He used to have an Instagram, but I guess now it's been deleted. I even tried to tell them the names of his 2 toddlers, but they couldn't find anything with that either. This incident happened in the summer of 2015. I lived by myself in a nice house in a small town. Very low crime rate, but there's still the occasional shady fucker. Anyway, at work that day on a smoke break, I watched a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle. 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran right out there and scooped his little ass up and booked it back to my workplace. Luckily, he did not get injured at all. It was quite amazing, actually. As a bleeding heart animal lover, I decided to take him home with me. At least until I could figure out what to do with him. I have a large amount of cats and always have. This was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. This guy was very shy. Head hung, tail tucked, very jumpy, just looking at me like I was about to beat him senseless. I was clueless at the time on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we had been out about 15 times, as I really didn't want him shitting in my house. I was having my final cigarette of the day on my porch at around 22:30 hours. The dog was on a lead chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit. I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs by my house. He kept glancing up at me before passing. Shortly after he passed my house, he stopped, turned on his heel, and started fast approaching me. Hi there, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is? He asked. I told him I would search the address on my phone, which of course was taking a minute to pull up. He explained he didn't have a phone of his own and was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps toward me the entire time. Finally, the address I summoned came up. It's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner of the cross street, I told him, pointing in that direction. He locked his eyes on me and continued to move slowly closer. Doggo started growling very softly at this point. I had honestly forgotten he was even there until now. Well, do you mind if I take a look at the map? He grinned sheepishly. I'm kinda bad with directions, you see. I rose from my seat, pointing again. Dude, it's just 2 blocks up this road. All you need to do is follow it. 2 blocks and the house will be on your left. I was making it very clear I was not just going to hand him my phone. Well, how about I call them then? I need to let them know I'm coming after all. He kept creeping closer, extending his hands. No, I curtly replied. Maybe I could shoot them a text, perhaps. Pushing even closer. Dude, no. I started backward toward my door. Just let me see your phone. He was very visibly becoming pissed off, clearly trying to contain it and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort of getting this dude to leave me alone, I said, "You need to get the fuck out of my yard. My dog is very protective, and I will let him fuck you up." Hell, I didn't know the first thing about this dog, let alone whether or not he had the capacity to fuck someone up. I just hoped saying so would intimidate this pushy phone guy. Like I had just said the magic words though, my pupper sprang into action. A la the wolf creature of never-ending story, he emerged like a bullet from underneath the chair, growling, snarling, barking his little arse off. He jerked me damn near off the porch, trying to get at this guy. He sounded and acted like an 80-pound attack dog, not a 40-pound timid beagle mix. I was actually a bit afraid in that moment. I didn't actually know if this pup would suddenly turn on me instead. As stated previously, at the time I knew absolutely jack nothing about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs, nudging me toward the door. Still carrying on, eyes locked on the phone dude and baring his teeth snarling. The phone dude held up his hands and backed off. He stammered something like, so 2 blocks north, yeah? And began walking away very fast. I went inside, cut off my lights, and peeked out the window at him. He kept glancing back at my house, assured I was inside. Then he turned and began sprinting in the complete opposite direction I had pointed him in. Icing on the cake, he immediately pulled the phone from his pocket and raised it to his ear to make a call. Doggo, of course, secured his place as a very valued member of my family that night. He's incredibly protective of me and has frightened away even another creep since this incident. He's very attached at my hip and has made it known he's grateful to be in a safe, loving home, where he will never again become a projectile from a moving vehicle. I've named him Hank now, and I truly believe that night would have ended very differently for me had he not been there to protect me. I'm not even entirely sure if this is the correct place for this, but I can't really think of anywhere else. I really want to talk about it, but I can't with anyone I know because of someone else's wishes. When I was about 11 years old, I had a steady babysitter named Jane. My brother and sister were 17 and 18, so they were either too cool to babysit me or busy with school around this time. Jane was around their age too, but I don't think her family had a lot of money, so she would babysit me almost every weekend, instead of doing normal teenager stuff. My family lived in a pretty well-to-do cul-de-sac in the back of a large neighborhood. It was one of those neighborhoods where houses got nicer the further back you went. The houses at the front by the main road were not as nice, but still not terrible or anything. This is where Jane lived. Since I was 11 and prepubescent, I was a huge pain in the ass. But not to Jane. I looked at her as a best friend. We did so many fun things together, and I could truly tell that Jane really loved me. One Saturday night, my mom was making plans for the next week. But for the very first time, Jane couldn't babysit because she had her first prom to go to. She was very excited because the boy she had a crush on for years had asked her. I knew because she had been telling me about him since she started high school. My mother and I were both very excited for her, and I saw my mom hand her way more money than usual. Jane's eyes immediately teared up, and she gave us both a heartfelt hug and left. Now, since this was the mid-90s, everyone got their babysitters from word of mouth. My mom had heard from another mother that a girl that used to babysit for her kids had just moved back to her parents' house after grad school. She lived right down the street from Jane. Her name was Becky. My mom called her up to see if she could babysit me that Saturday instead. Becky excitedly said yes, and then proceeded to ask my mom some very strange but not entirely alarming questions. How tall I was, what I looked like. There were probably some others in there, but I was just hearing my mom's side of the conversation. When she hung up the phone, my mom immediately said to my dad, "Wow, she sure is thorough." I was just a little bit nervous, as Jane had been the only one to babysit me for years. In the rare instances she couldn't do it, my parents usually canceled their plans. This was a work party though, and my dad was being honored, so that wasn't an option this time. A couple of days before Becky was to come, I begged my mom to call Jane. I wanted to see if I could come over the night of prom and see her in her dress. My mom kept telling me she wouldn't want me there, and I could see pictures instead, but I insisted. So my mom called Jane and handed the phone to me. "Oh, hi there, May. How are you?" I'm good. I just wanted to see if I could come over on Saturday and see you in your prom dress before you go. Oh, sure. I'm getting my hair done, but you can come after that, maybe around 5:30 or so. Tell your mom to call first and make sure I'm home, though. Oh, it won't be my mom, it'll be Becky. Dead silence. Wait, what did you just say? Since you couldn't watch me, my mom found a girl named Becky to do it. There was a long pause. Oh, okay, sweetie, that's fine. She hurriedly got me off the phone. I went to school the next day and came home to my mom hanging up the phone and shaking her head vigorously. Poor Jane. Her date doesn't want to take her anymore. Seems they had a fight. She wanted to know if she could still watch it this Saturday. I feel bad canceling on Becky, but I guess it's completely up to you. Of course, I chose Jane. And as usual, we had a lot of fun together. I didn't bring up the prom because I really didn't want to make her sad. Then though, she asked me if I wanted to play dress up with her. We did each other's hair and put on my mom's dresses and took pictures with my mother's Polaroid. It was the best night of my 11-year-old life. Jane went to community college after that, and by the time she went to a 4-year school, I no longer needed a babysitter. We kept in touch a little bit after that, but before long we both got very busy, and we sort of lost touch with each other. That was where the story ended, until this past weekend. I ran into Jane at a bar. She was not sober. In fact, she was very drunk and didn't seem to be doing very well. She was extremely thin, and it looked like she had track marks on her arms too. This made me really sad, because she was one of the people I loved the most in the entire world, at least at one time in my life. I sat next to her at the bar and asked her how she was doing. Her face lit up immediately, and she gave me the biggest hug. I always knew you would do well for yourself. Look at you, you're so grown up and beautiful. You look great too, Jane. No, I don't, but that's okay. We started talking, and she started drinking even more. I got the feeling she was nearing blackout territory. She was with a group of people that seemed to be her friends, so I wasn't entirely worried for her, but I still didn't want to leave her for some reason. She just seemed really happy to see me. So we started reminiscing. And once it was my turn to bring up a story again, I said, "Remember when that dirtbag stood you up for prom? We staged our own prom with pictures and everything. That was really great, wasn't it?" She looked at me through foggy eyes and smiled a sad smile. He didn't stand me up, you know. That replacement babysitter was a sick fuck. When I was little, she would beat me, sexually abuse me, threaten me and lock me in closets. Then she would invite her boyfriend over to do the same things to me. She told me if I ever told anyone, she would kill my entire family and I would have to live in an orphanage. She took pictures of me too. I had it all repressed until you said her name that day, and then it all came back. All of it. I should have told someone, but I guess it's too late now. I just didn't want people to know what happened to me. I thought they would look at me differently. I regret it so much. Who knows what else she did because I never said anything. She set down her drink and gave me a big hug and said, "Good to see you," like she hadn't just dropped this major bomb on me. Then she stumbled away with her boyfriend. Everything came flooding back to me in that moment. The phone conversation with Becky with all the details, Jane's silence when I said her name, how Jane stayed with me every single weekend from then on until I was old enough to never need a babysitter again. Some people might say she should have told someone. But she was just a kid. She was an extraordinary kid. She gave up her prom to save me. She gave up every single weekend after that so nothing bad would ever happen to me. She was my guardian angel. Unfortunately, Jane didn't have her own Jane, and that makes me feel terrible. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I lived where I lived for 3 years. It's a nice apartment in an amazing location, but they were built in the 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom, and people have been non-stop pouring in. It has good weather, an amazing economy, and it's a cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I've seen the landlord's staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date and attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he finally ended up buying a house and moved away. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is there are 2 stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct other side of the bedroom wall is the staircase to my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout is, has my bed right up next against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was actually one of the first ones that they did such heavy remodeling for. For weeks, I would always see workers over there painting, redoing floors, etc. A few days before this happened was no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work, they were already gone for the day. Nothing unusual, not even a single bit. The part that is unusual, though, is what happened one particular night. I was awake around 1 a.m. watching TV in my room when I heard someone on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head laid on the other side of the wall. I could just feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing for a few minutes. Then, after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person begin walking the rest of the flight of stairs up to the 2nd floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that the person on the other side of that wall had been listening to me. I also knew it had only been 2 days before this happened that I'd seen the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. I knew there was no way someone could have already moved in that fast. I quietly got out of bed and went to a room where I had a better view of the outside of the apartment. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anyone walked out. I sat there for around 15 minutes, just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back to my room and laid down in my bed again. This time, though, I didn't play the TV. I just sat there waiting to hear something once more. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence until I heard movement on the stairs again. This time, though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I had been sitting there in silence, this person was just on the other side of the wall, listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the cops. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me someone would be out very soon. I went back to the one room and watched the window again. Only a few minutes later, a police car pulled up. A cop got out to examine the building and the apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door, and shortly after, I could hear him begin talking to someone, but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I walked downstairs, and he informed me very nicely that someone had just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop, "What a hell of a way to meet your new neighbor." I felt very embarrassed, but more importantly, I felt very relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as it just being light and my mind playing massive tricks on me. The next day, though, when I went to leave my apartment, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps toward my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment, and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on, and not a single piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked right over to a maintenance man and asked, "Hey, didn't someone just move in here?" He informed me no. The apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks later. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called my landlord. I asked her if someone was staying there. She said absolutely not. I told her what I'd experienced the night before. She was completely floored and told me she would change the apartment's locks right away. She also suggested I call the non-emergency line to the police department and informed them that no one actually lived there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all of the information in detail of what happened. They were able to quickly figure out which officer came out to check the situation so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed I had never seen him around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out, and I stopped hearing about it. I started seeing less and less patrol cars randomly in the parking lot too. After that night, I never heard another thing in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in, and they're honestly very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went outside to introduce myself to them. But to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping in the following weeks after that happened to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I have zero idea what the intentions of the person were or what he was doing in that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that's ever happened to me.